The floorboards of the Crawford estate do not just creak, they groan under the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. Dust motes dance in the slivers of light cutting through the heavy velvet curtains, settling on the spines of books that haven't been touched in years. The air here is thick, clinging to the back of the throat with the metallic tang of old paper and something darker, something stagnant. Welcome to Swasti Diaries, where we peel back the layers of the human psyche to uncover the cold, hard logic behind the most unsettling crimes. My name is Lowen Ashleigh, and I have been invited here to finish a legacy, a series of novels that have made the Crawford name famous. But standing in this grand hollow foyer, the ink on the page feels like a distraction. The house itself is a forensic puzzle. Every shadow, every misplaced chair, every scent of stale medicine drifting from the upper floors suggests that the story written in the books is nothing compared to the one etched into the floorboards. I trace my fingers along the mahogany banister. The wood is cold, unnervingly smooth. There is no warmth here, just the mechanical hum of an oxygen machine somewhere deep in the house, a steady rhythmic pulse that sounds less like life support and more like a countdown. I am here to write, but the silence demands an autopsy. I came looking for a plot, but I have stepped into a cage. The doors are locked from the inside, and the keys are buried in a history that Jeremy Crawford is desperate to keep rewritten. I can feel the house watching, waiting to see if I am sharp enough to notice the gaps in the narrative, or if I will simply become another chapter in their descent. The office is a tomb of professional ambition, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with leather-bound volumes that feel more like monuments than books. I pull a heavy oak chair away from the desk. It makes a sharp, screeching sound against the hardwood, a jagged tear in the quiet. My hands tremble slightly as I clear a stack of medical journals. Underneath, a loose floorboard sits flush, yet the wood grain doesn't align with the surrounding planks. Pry it up. My fingernails dig into the splintering edge. Beneath the dust, tucked into the dark cavity, lies a slim black, leather-bound manuscript. I pull it out, and the smell hits me instantly. It isn't just the mustiness of an old basement or the sterile scent of the house. It is sharp metallic iron, a scent that triggers a primal, warning pulse in my chest. I open the cover. The handwriting is aggressive, the pen strokes so heavy they have perforated the paper in places. It is not the flowing, elegant script of the famous author I know. It is erratic, frantic, and claustrophobic. Every letter seems to have been carved with a deliberate, cold precision, as if the author were not merely writing, but recording a crime. I flip through the pages. The ink is dark, thick, and almost dried into a crust. It doesn't look like standard fountain pen ink. It looks like a biological stain. As I read the first sentence, the rhythmic hum of the oxygen machine from upstairs stops. The house falls into an absolute, suffocating silence. I am not reading a novel. I am holding a map of horrors, a record of bones broken and trust shattered, all documented with the detached curiosity of a surgeon. The ink is still damp with the weight of the past. The ink stains bleed through the vellum, a dark arterial web of words that pulse under the dim desk lamp. I trace the indentations where the pen tore into the fibers. The pressure is violent. It is not the work of a writer finding her flow. It is the work of a woman venting a pressure cooker of resentment. The narrative begins not with a mother's love, but with a clinical catalog of failures, a list of moments where she watched her children stumble and chose to blink instead of reaching out. She writes of the dining room table, the precise angle of a child's arm as it snapped against the wood, and the way she sat across from him, sipping wine while the air turned thick with the metallic tang of fear. My breath catches in my throat. The house feels smaller now. The walls seem to lean inward, listening. There is a terrifying detachment in her prose. She describes the color of a bruise as if it were a paint swatch, detailing the transition from violet to sickly, jaundiced yellow with an artist's eye for decay. She doesn't call them children. She calls them the impediments. My eyes dart to the doorway, expecting a shadow to stretch across the hardwood. The manuscript suggests a schedule of neglect, a routine built on the calculated withdrawal of basic care. It was not a lapse in judgment but a project. A cold, long-term experiment in emotional attrition. I can feel the weight of the ink on my fingertips, a smudge of dark, dried pigment that refuses to wipe away. The silence of the house is no longer empty. It is heavy, pressurized, and waiting for me to turn the next page. I pull the medical files from the leather-bound folder, the paper crisp and smelling of sterile archives, a sharp contrast to the stale, suffocating air of this room. I spread them across the desk, layering them like a deck of marked cards. Beside them, the manuscript remains open, its ink-stained pages whispering of intent. I begin the tedious work of synchronization. The manuscript claims a fall on a Tuesday in November, a calculated trip meant to test the structural integrity of a small collarbone. I flip to the hospital intake record. The date matches, but the narrative does not. The doctor's notes describe a freak stumble over a rug, a clumsy, singular accident. My pulse quickens, not with fear, but with the cold clarity of a predator spotting a trail. I look at the manuscript again. She describes the sound of the bone, a sharp, dry snap like a dead twig in winter. The medical report, however, notes the lack of defensive bruising on the palms. If a child falls, instinct dictates they reach out. The absence of those bruises is the loudest scream in the room. I move to the next entry. A head injury in late spring. The manuscript speaks of a heavy bookend, a deliberate swing, a test of patience. The medical log lists it as a collision with a door frame. My fingers tremble as I adjust my reading glasses. It is not just one lie. It is a tapestry woven over years. Each accident is a surgical strike, designed to look like the inevitable clumsy misfortune of youth. The ink on the manuscript is dark, so dark it seems to absorb the light of the lamp. I realize then that the manuscript wasn't a confession. It was a ledger, a balance sheet of pain, kept by someone who viewed these children not as her own blood, but as variables in a long, cruel experiment. I reach for my pen, my hand hovering over the paper, ready to connect the dots that no one else was meant to see. The floorboards in the hallway don't creak, they sigh. Jeremy moves through the house with a silence that feels engineered, a predator practicing stealth in his own living room. I watch him from the threshold of the study. He stops at the bedside, his movements precise, clinical. He adjusts the four-drip, his fingers tracing the plastic tubing with a familiarity that borders on the intimate. Verity lies there, a statue of porcelain in stillness. Does she breathe? I watch the rise and fall of her chest, a rhythmic, shallow cadence that feels practiced. Jeremy leans in, his face inches from hers. He doesn't look like a grieving husband tending to his ailing wife. He looks like a technician checking the calibration on a machine. He shifts, his weight settling into the floorboards, and for a heartbeat, his gaze drifts toward the study door. I pull back, pressing my spine against the cold wood of the frame. My breath hitches in my throat, a sharp, ragged thing I have to force into submission. He is not just watching her. He is monitoring the environment, ensuring the variables remain constant. I look back at the manuscript on my desk, the ink dark, almost oily, the ledger of pain. I realize now that the house itself is a sensory deprivation chamber. Every sound is dampened, every light dimmed to a specific oppressive frequency. Jeremy turns away from the bed, his footsteps retreating toward the kitchen. He walks with a rhythmic, heavy tread, a metronome counting down the seconds until the next incident. I wait for the sound of the refrigerator door, the clink of glass, the mundane noises of a domestic life that hides a rotting core. He is waiting for me to slip. He is waiting for me to mistake this performance for the truth. The kitchen silence is absolute, a heavy vacuum that allows the rustle of paper to sound like a gunshot. I spread the manuscript pages across the desk, stark white against the dark mahogany. My hands are steady, though my pulse thumps a jagged rhythm against my wrists. I turn to the section detailing the youngest child's fall. The manuscript describes a fracture consistent with a high-velocity impact, a spiral break to the humerus. I cross-reference this with the archived medical reports I managed to extract from the basement safe. The ink in the manuscript is thick, almost three-dimensional, as if the author took pleasure in the precision of the description. It specifies the angle of the limb at the moment of trauma. A child's fall from a bed does not produce a rotational fracture of that magnitude. It requires torque. It requires a hand, a grip, and a deliberate twist. My eyes scan the forensic diagrams. The patterns of bruising are not random smudges of play. They are thumb-sized pressure points clustered on the inner thigh and the upper arm. The evidence is not just physical, it is calculated. The manuscript claims these injuries were the result of clumsiness. Yet the medical notes show a pattern of healing that suggests repeated, staggered trauma over months. Each injury was timed to avoid raising suspicion from the school nurses, a cycle of damage and controlled recovery. I pushed the chair back, the wood scraping harshly against the floor. The logic is a cold, sharp blade. These were not accidents. They were experiments in structural integrity, a study in how much a small frame can endure before it breaks. Jeremy moves in the kitchen, the clink of a knife against a plate echoing through the house. He is setting the table for a meal no one will eat. I stare at the manuscript, realizing the author wasn't documenting a life, they were documenting a disintegration. I isolate the manuscript beneath the halogen desk lamp, the harsh light bleaching the paper to a clinical, sterile white. My focus shifts from the gruesome mechanics of the injuries to the architecture of the sentences themselves. A sociopath writes with a specific hollow efficiency, a total absence of self-reference. I scan for the I, the me, the internal monologue of guilt. It is absent. Instead, the narrative reads like a technical manual for a piece of machinery that happens to be a child. The verbs are sharp, active, and devoid of ambiguity. There is no perhaps, no maybe, no hesitation in the description of the trauma. I pull a copy of Verity's published novels from the shelf, laying them side by side. The contrast is visceral. Her public prose is flowery, dense with emotional projection and ornate metaphors, a facade of empathy. But this manuscript uses a syntax that is stripped to the bone. It is the language of someone who has removed the filter of human feeling entirely. I trace the ink with a gloved finger. The pressure is consistent, not the frantic scrawl of a breakdown, but the measured, deliberate strokes of a craftsman. My heart rate slows, matching the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. If this were a confession, there would be tremors in the penmanship, a softening of the tone. There is none. I realize then that the manuscript is not a diary of events. It is a clinical observation report, designed to be read by an audience that never existed. I look toward the kitchen doorway. Jeremy is still there, his back to me, his shoulders rigid. He is waiting for a reaction. He is waiting for me to find exactly what he has meticulously curated for my eyes to see. The deception is not in what is written, but in the cold, calculated precision of the omission. The dining table is a vast expanse of polished mahogany, a neutral ground for a war fought in whispers. I sit opposite Verity. Her face is a mask of marble, smoothed by the pale, artificial light of the chandelier. I watch her hands. They rest flat on the tablecloth, immobile, devoid of even the minor twitch of a nervous pulse. I decide to test the perimeter. I mention the manuscript, specifically the passage detailing the chemical suppression of the children's sleep. I do not look at her eyes. I look at her throat. I watch for the involuntary swallow, the slight tension of the sternocleidomastoid muscle that betrays a lie. The dosage mentioned in the records, I say, my voice steady. It seems unusually high for a standard recovery protocol. The air in the room turns heavy, pressurized by the silence that follows. Verity does not blink. She does not shift her weight. She remains a statue, a predator in a state of suspended animation, observing my every micro-expression. Jeremy is at the head of the table, his fork hovering mid-air, his gaze oscillating between us like a metronome. He is waiting for me to trip, for my logic to fray under the weight of her stillness. I realize then that she is not catatonic. She is hunting. She is measuring the depth of my suspicion, waiting for me to reveal exactly how much I have decoded from those ink-stained pages. My pulse thrums against my collarbone, a frantic rhythmic tapping. I push the conversation toward the specific dates of the incidents. I watch her lips. They remain pressed into a thin, pale line. She is letting me speak, letting me build the case, waiting for the precise second when my hypothesis hits a flaw. The room is cold, the scent of antiseptic lingering beneath the smell of roasted meat. We are all performing, trapped in a cycle of calculated deceit. I excuse myself from the table, my legs feeling like leaden weights as I navigate the hallway toward the basement. The door groans on its hinges, a dry, splintering sound that echoes into the dark. Down here, the air is dense, tasting of damp concrete, and the metallic tang of forgotten history. I click on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the dust motes that dance like tiny, suspended ghosts. I move past the rusted water heater, my fingers trailing along the cold, sweating walls until I reach the loose paneling behind the workbench. It gives way with a soft click. Inside, tucked away from the prying eyes of the household, is a heavy leather-bound ledger. My heart hammers against my ribs, a frantic, uneven rhythm. I open it. The pages are yellowed, brittle, and covered in precise, clinical handwriting. These are not journals. They are logs. Dates, times, and dosages. I flip further, my breath hitching as I find a stack of pharmacy receipts tucked between the pages. They are receipts for phenobarbital and high-grade sedatives, substances that have no place in a home with small, healthy children. The dates align perfectly with the periods of lethargy mentioned in the manuscript. My hands tremble as I trace the ink. This was not a medical necessity. This was a systematic, calculated chemical suppression. Someone was keeping these children in a permanent state of twilight, a fog of induced sleep that masked the reality of their surroundings. The ink on the ledger is dark, almost black, a stark, unforgiving record of a hidden agenda. I realize then that the house above me is not just a home. It is a laboratory of controlled isolation. I tuck the receipts into my pocket, the crinkle of the paper sounding like a gunshot in the oppressive silence of the basement. The basement air grows thin as I turn to leave, but the floorboard creaks beneath me, not from my own weight, but from the shadow stretching across the concrete. Jeremy stands at the base of the stairs. His face is a mask of practiced concern, yet his eyes are cold, sharp, and entirely devoid of warmth. He doesn't ask what I am doing here. He already knows. He steps into the light, his fingers tracing the edge of the workbench. He begins to speak, his voice a low, calculated hum that vibrates in the stagnant air. He tells me that the manuscript is a fiction, a weaponized narrative designed to destroy the family from within. He claims the pharmacy receipts were placed there by someone else, a plan to validate the madness written in those pages. He suggests that Verity is not the architect of this cruelty, but the primary target of a long-term psychological siege. My pulse quickens, the paper in my pocket feeling like a burning coal against my thigh. Is he protecting her? Or is he gaslighting me, rewriting the history of this house in real time to suit his own narrative? He leans in closer, the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee clinging to his sweater. He stares at the ledger, his jaw tight. He insists that the ink wasn't just blood and pigment. It was a forgery, a chemical cocktail engineered to mimic the passage of time. The logic of his argument is terrifyingly precise. If he is telling the truth, then the manuscript is a ghost, a phantom limb of a crime that never happened. But if he is lying, he is the master puppeteer, and I am merely the next character he has written into his tragedy. I hold my breath, waiting for the crack in his composure, but he remains as still as stone. I retreat to the study, the door clicking shut with a finality that feels like a prison gate. My lungs burn. The air here is stale, saturated with the smell of old paper and dust. I lay the manuscript out, side by side with Verity's published novels. The contrast is not just in content, it is in the very structure of the language. Her novels are curated, precise, almost cold in their grammatical perfection. But these pages, the ones I took from the basement, they are frantic. The syntax shifts abruptly. Sentences are clipped, shattered into jagged fragments that suggest a mind operating under extreme, sustained cortisol spikes. It is not the writing of a woman in cold reflection. It is the writing of a survivor, or perhaps a prisoner of her own terror. I pull out my magnifying glass, focusing on the loops of the letters, the pressure of the pen against the fibrous paper. The ink, it smears slightly under the lens, revealing a chemical signature that is inconsistent with standard commercial brands. I compare the stroke patterns to her known signatures from bank documents. They match, yet they do not. The fluidity is mirrored, but the tension in the wrist, the way the pen bites into the page, shows a physical agony, a tremor that she never allowed in her public works. My heart thuds against my ribs, a rhythmic, dull ache. If she wrote this while under duress, then the manuscript is not a confession of her own malice. It is a desperate, encoded SOS. Or perhaps a meticulously staged deception meant to mimic the signs of trauma. I need to find the chemical analysis logs. I need to know if the ink matches the biological samples I found in the pharmacy receipts. The truth is hiding in the chemistry, and I am finally beginning to see the patterns forming in the dark. My fingers tremble, not from fear, but from the raw friction of realization. I hold the page under the warm glow of the desk lamp, the light cutting through the fibers of the paper. There it is. A subtle, microscopic inconsistency. The ink stroke on the third paragraph of page 42 sits slightly higher than the indentation of the paper beneath it. It was added later, after the original text had already been pressed into the grain. Someone has been back here, rewriting the history of this family. I cross-reference the timeline of the pharmacy receipts against the specific dates mentioned in the manuscript. The dates do not align. The events described in the text, the broken glass, the midnight medicine administration, the forced silence, they happened weeks after the pharmacy logs show the house was empty. My pulse quickens. If the timeline is a fabrication, the entire narrative is a stage play. I trace the line where the ink was altered. The pressure is lighter, more calculated. It lacks the frantic, trembling tremor of the earlier entries. This is not a confession written in the heat of a breakdown. It is a correction, a deliberate surgical edit meant to frame the timeline of the abuse to match the dates when Jeremy was the only one in the house. The silence in the room feels heavy, pressurized, the air thin. I am looking at a map of a crime that has been redrawn by a ghost. Every word I thought I understood, every horror I felt for Verity, is suddenly a calculated move on a chessboard. Someone wanted me to find this specific version of the truth. Someone wanted me to look at these pages and see a monster, while they stood in the shadows holding the pen. The realization leaves me breathless, a chilling, hollow ache in my chest. I push the manuscript aside. It is a distraction, a narrative trap designed to pull my eyes away from the cold, clinical reality of the medical files. My hands move to the thick, manila folder buried at the bottom of the drawer. These are the pediatric health records. I lay them out on the desk. A timeline of biological data. I trace the blood pressure readings, the cortisol levels, and the erratic sleep cycles recorded over a 3-year period. The pattern is undeniable. Every peak of illness, every documented incident of respiratory distress, corresponds exactly to the weeks Verity was purportedly the primary caregiver. I flip the pages, the data is stark. There is a sharp vertical drop in every negative symptom, the moment the children were taken to their grandmother's house for those 2 weeks in July. The red ink of the doctor's notes is clear. Patient shows marked improvement in absence of home environment. It is not a suggestion. It is a diagnosis of environmental toxicity. I look at the pharmacy logs again. The sedative dosage is high, enough to induce a persistent lethargic state in a developing child. Why would a mother or a father do this? I check the signature on the authorization forms. The handwriting is erratic, pressed deep into the paper. It is not Verity's elegant script. It is jagged, aggressive, and undeniably masculine. Jeremy, he didn't just edit the manuscript, he curated their biology. He kept them in a state of chemical fragility to ensure his own narrative of Verity's abuse remained visible to any doctor who dared to look. The room feels colder now, the air stagnant. The truth isn't buried in the words on the page. It is hidden in the chemical baseline of their blood. I am not reading a story anymore. I am auditing a systematic, physiological destruction. The weight of the paper in my hands is physical. A crushing density of ink and intent. I stand by the window, the glass cold against my forehead, watching the rain streak the pane in erratic, jagged lines. Below, the garden is a blur of gray. I look at the manuscript one last time, the pages ruffled by the drafts moving through this house. If I burn this, the truth dies with the man who curated it, and the woman who watched him do it. If I release it, I become an architect of their destruction, a participant in the very cycle of ruin I despise. I walk to the center of the study, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight like a warning. The pharmacy receipts remain on the desk, a quiet, damning testament to the chemical suppression of 2 small lives. Jeremy's jagged signature stares back at me, a map of his own descent into madness. He didn't just want to frame Verity. He wanted to own the narrative of their suffering. And Verity, she simply let him. She sat in the shadows of her own room, a silent witness, waiting for the moment when his performance became too heavy to carry. They are 2 predators trapped in a cage of their own making. I feel the urge to tear the pages, to erase the evidence of this calculated cruelty, but my fingers stop. The truth is not a luxury. It is a debt. I set the document down, the edges sharp and biting. There is no clean exit here, no moral high ground to retreat to. I am the only one left with the full picture, the only one who sees the threads of this grotesque tapestry. Outside, the wind shifts, rattling the heavy oak door. I have to make a choice, not between right and wrong, but between silence and the fire. The house feels different now, the air thinner, the silence heavier. I look at the ink on the pages, the chemical signatures of blood and betrayal, and I realize the manuscript was never meant to be a record. It was a mirror. Jeremy and Verity spent years constructing a reality where their own malice was hidden behind the fiction of the other. The pharmacy logs, the altered syntax, the staged catatonia. These were not symptoms of a family, but components of a machine designed to grind down the innocent. I stand in the hallway, the floorboards cold beneath my feet. I have the evidence. I have the motive. But in this house where every shadow holds a secret, I wonder if the truth even matters anymore. If I walk out that door, I carry the burden of their wreckage. If I stay, I am just another ghost in the hallway, waiting for the floor to give way. The wind outside hits the window, a sharp rhythmic tapping that sounds like a gavel. Perhaps the greatest crime was not the violence itself, but the way they turned their lives into a performance for an audience of one. The cycle is broken, yet the house remains a tomb of unsaid words. I leave the manuscript on the table, a final damning testament to 2 people who chose to destroy the world rather than face themselves. As I lock the door, the click echoes through the empty rooms, a final period on a story that should never have been written. The truth is exposed, but the scars are permanent. Thank you for walking through this darkness with me. If you want to uncover the next cold case, make sure to subscribe to Swasti Diaries and turn on the notifications. The truth is always waiting in the shadows.